Imagine uncovering a tomb in ancient Egypt, but instead of gold and treasure, you find something far more disturbing. Carvings of rituals so extreme, so forbidden, that archaeologists once burned the evidence to keep it hidden. Tonight, we're pulling back the veil on Egypt's darkest secrets, the ones your history books never dared to mention. Section 1. The chamber smelled of resin and lotus ash. A single oil lamp flickered, casting golden light across the limestone walls carved with prayers to gods that had long since ceased listening. The embalmer, Neferhotep, had worked on nobles before, warlords, viziers, even a prince who died mysteriously at 13, but never had he been summoned for something like this. Before him, laid out on the obsidian slab, was the body of Queen Merisara, beloved wife of Pharaoh Karen. Her skin, pale with death, had already begun to stiffen. But Neferhotep noticed something immediately. The scrolls given to him were not the sacred rituals of purification, passed down for centuries. These were strange instructions written in a priest's urgent hand, detailing a procedure that violated every canon of embalming he had ever known. He turned to the high priest, who stood silently in the corner, his black linen robes smelling faintly of myrrh. "This is not our way," Neferhotep whispered. "The body must be made whole to live again in the afterlife. To remove such things." The priest's eyes flashed. "Do as written. The king commands it." And then Neferhotep understood. This was no ordinary mummification. This was mutilation. What could drive a pharaoh, called the living sun, the breath of Ra, to demand such desecration of his own queen? The answer, as history would reveal, was far more disturbing than simple jealousy or ritual error. It was part of a system, an entire civilization, that had fused sex, power, and divinity into something darker than we can easily comprehend today. We are taught of Nile's grandeur, of temples that kiss the sky, of golden sarcophagi gleaming in the desert sun. What we are not told, what most museums and textbooks deliberately omit, is how the intimate rituals of the Nile shaped not only life and death but the very politics of empire. And some practices were so shocking that later generations, Greeks, Romans, and even Victorian archaeologists, burned the records rather than allow their secrets to see the light of day. What follows is not myth, nor mere speculation. It is the shadow history of Kemet, ancient Egypt's darker twin, hidden beneath the glittering sand. Section 2. The silence in the embalming chamber was heavy, broken only by the hiss of oil in the lamp and the faint sound of river water echoing from the canals outside. Neferhotep's hands trembled as he unrolled the papyrus once more, scanning the instructions that made no sense. Where he expected to see the sacred command, "Return the body as whole as when it was born," he instead found words that chilled him. "Remove the vessel of pleasure, for it has betrayed the divine. Burn it, and scatter the ash upon the black soil of the Nile." He whispered the phrase to himself, unable to believe it. "Remove the vessel of pleasure." The high priest's voice sliced through the air. "Do not linger. Pharaoh waits for her to be made pure." "But purity is wholeness," Neferhotep protested. His voice cracked, both from fear and disbelief. "The gods will not recognize her without what is hers by birth." The priest stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the slab, swallowing the queen's still face. "Do you think the gods care for your trembling hands? It is not your place to decide. Karen himself has spoken. And when the pharaoh commands, the gods obey." The embalmer swallowed hard, staring at Queen Merisara's lifeless body. In life she had been beloved, her laughter compared to the silver bells of Hathor's temple. There were stories of her feeding orphans during the floods, her presence at the harvest festivals, her prayers sung by thousands. Yet here she was, reduced to flesh on stone, about to be altered in ways no sacred text condoned. Neferhotep pressed his palm to his forehead. What was happening? Was this a punishment? A ritual correction? Or something more sinister? Something meant not for the afterlife but for the living? As he sharpened the obsidian blade, a strange thought gnawed at him. This was not the first time. He had heard whispers from the other embalming houses, rumors of young princes who were never buried whole, of nobles whose bodies showed signs of deliberate mutilation. Once, he dismissed such talk as jealous gossip. Now, faced with the command to desecrate the queen, he began to wonder if those whispers carried the weight of truth. He leaned over her, the blade glinting in the lamplight. His hands hesitated. Then, with a voice heavy as stone, the high priest spoke again. "Do you want your children to wake tomorrow, embalmer?" Neferhotep froze. His blood turned to ice. The message was clear. Obey, or watch his family vanish into the Nile's current. And so, with shaking hands, he pressed the blade down. Section 3. The first cut was the hardest. Neferhotep's blade pressed into the queen's pale flesh, and though she could no longer feel it, the act felt like an unspeakable crime against her spirit. The oil lamp sputtered as though protesting, casting frantic shadows that danced across the walls, and the embalmer's breath came in sharp gasps. Every instinct screamed at him to stop. The sacred rites were built upon wholeness, every organ preserved, every limb wrapped with prayers, every cut made with reverence. Yet here he was, carving away what had been declared shameful, as if the gods themselves could be deceived by absence. When the task was done, Neferhotep set the obsidian blade down, his hands slick with sweat. He placed what he had removed into a bronze basin, as instructed. The high priest nodded solemnly, and sprinkled the flesh with natron. "Burn it until no trace remains." Neferhotep obeyed. The brazier roared to life, consuming the forbidden remains in smoke that curled and coiled like angry serpents. The stench was acrid, clinging to his lungs. He wanted to gag, but he dared not show weakness before the priest. When the last ember dimmed, the priest drew a sigil in the ash and whispered words that were not part of any ritual Neferhotep had ever known. His voice carried a rhythm that felt older, darker, as though it belonged not to the gods of the temples but to something far beneath them. At last, the priest turned to him. "It is done. She is pure again." "Pure?" Neferhotep's voice cracked. "This is blasphemy." The priest's eyes narrowed, his face half hidden by shadow. "You will speak of blasphemy when Pharaoh himself decrees? Careful, embalmer. The gods listen in silence, but men do not." That night, as Neferhotep returned home, the Nile wind carried the faint echo of drums from the royal district. A festival had begun, celebrating the queen's passage to the afterlife. Yet instead of joy, Neferhotep felt only a chill. His wife noticed it too. "Why do you tremble so, my husband?" she asked, laying a hand on his shoulder. He could not tell her. To speak would mean death for them both. So he simply said, "The dead grow restless." But the truth gnawed at him. If such things were commanded for the queen, what horrors awaited others who crossed the pharaoh, or worse, who failed in their sacred duties of intimacy and divine potency? For Neferhotep had begun to realize something terrifying. The queen's mutilation was not an isolated act. It was part of a greater system, a belief that sexuality itself could be twisted, controlled, weaponized, and even destroyed, all in service to the throne. And soon, the whispers he had once ignored would come roaring to life, dragging him into the darkest secrets of Kemet's hidden history. Section 4. The days that followed were filled with silence. Neferhotep performed his duties with mechanical precision, packing cavities with natron, wrapping limbs in linen soaked with resin. But his mind was elsewhere. Every time he touched a body, he remembered the queen, the basin, the ash. He began to notice things he had overlooked before. A nobleman's corpse with deep scars along the thighs, crudely hidden beneath wrappings. A young scribe's body missing not from decay, but from deliberate removal. A soldier with strange incisions carved into his groin, as though altered after death. At first, he told himself it was coincidence. But the evidence grew too numerous to ignore. This was a pattern, not an accident. One evening, as the workers swept the embalming hall, Neferhotep lingered near the stone jars that held organs for burial. An older assistant, his hair gray and hands spotted with age, leaned close and whispered, "You saw it, didn't you?" Neferhotep froze. "Saw what?" "The truth," the old man hissed, his voice barely audible above the hum of insects outside. "The ones who are not whole. The ones the priests call corrections." Neferhotep's pulse quickened. "You know of this?" The old man's eyes darted to the doorway. He nodded once. "I have seen boys brought in, still breathing. Princes. Servants. Sometimes slaves. Their cries were muffled with cloth, but I heard them. The priest said it was necessary, that their bodies had to be reshaped to serve in the field of reeds. But tell me, what god demands such cruelty?" The words struck Neferhotep like a hammer. He had suspected, but hearing another speak it aloud shattered the fragile denial he clung to. Later that night, unable to rest, Neferhotep walked along the Nile's edge. The moon reflected silver on the water, broken by ripples where crocodiles lurked. He thought of the queen's face, serene even as she was desecrated, and of the boys the old embalmer spoke of. He thought of the high priest's threat, his children waking no more. The truth came crashing down. The kingdom of Kemet, praised for its splendor, was built not only on stone and gold but on flesh. Intimacy was not private. It was public, political, sacred, and violent. Every act of pleasure was claimed as an offering. Every body, whether noble or slave, was a vessel for ritual. The pharaoh's potency was not merely personal, it was cosmic. His performance was believed to control the Nile's flood, the growth of crops, the fate of armies. And if he faltered, if his household failed to project divine virility, the priests turned to desperate measures. The mutilation of Queen Merisara was not a mistake. It was a symptom of something deeper, a system where sex was weaponized, where purity meant domination, and where even the dead were not free from the politics of the flesh. Neferhotep shuddered, staring into the dark current. Somewhere in that water, he imagined, drifted the ashes of what he had burned. And the Nile carried secrets it never gave back. Section 5. The summons came at dusk, when the horizon still glowed with the last red fire of Ra's sunboat sinking into the west. 2 temple guards appeared at Neferhotep's home, their bronze spears catching the light. "The high priest calls," one said curtly. Neferhotep's heart dropped into his stomach. He kissed his children quickly, lingering too long on their foreheads, as if it might be the last time. His wife's eyes searched his face, but she did not speak. They both knew questions were dangerous. The guards led him through torchlit avenues into the Temple of the Black Sun, a place he had never entered though he had embalmed dozens who served it. Its towering pylons were covered in carvings, but unlike the joyous scenes of other temples, farmers under the sun, offerings of lotus and bread, these walls depicted shadows, men kneeling before priests, women bound in ritual poses, children carried by masked attendants. The figures writhed, caught forever in stone. The air inside smelled of spice, beer, and incense, cloying and heavy. Torches burned low, making the vast hall glow like a cavern. From the shadows, chanting rose, deep, rhythmic, like the pulse of the Nile itself. At the center of the hall stood a massive black altar of basalt, polished to a mirror sheen. Priests in dark linen circled it, their arms raised. And before them, dozens of men and women writhed together, their bodies slick with oil, their movements frenzied. Neferhotep froze. He had heard whispers of the night of renewal, but never believed them. This was no holy hymn, no sacrifice of bread or wine. This was flesh worship, performed without shame, as though the gods themselves were watching. The high priest appeared beside him, as if conjured from the shadows. "Behold," he said softly, his voice vibrating like a plucked string. "This is how we keep the Nile alive." Neferhotep's throat went dry. This is blasphemy." "Blasphemy?" The priest chuckled, his eyes gleaming. "No, embalmer. This is devotion. Every gasp, every cry is a prayer. Every release, an offering. When the pharaoh falters, when the Nile grows weak, it is these acts that restore balance. Do you think the gods are fed by grain alone?" As he spoke, Neferhotep saw a group of children led to the altar, their faces pale in the torchlight. His stomach turned. He wanted to cry out, to run forward, to stop what he knew was coming, But the guard's spears pressed gently against his back, warning him into silence. The chanting grew louder, echoing through the stone. The priests lifted their hands. The torches flared. And Neferhotep realized that this was not a secret ritual at all. This was the beating heart of the kingdom. The mutilations, the burned remains, the whispers of corrections. They were all part of the same system. A system where intimacy itself was chained to power, where children were offerings, and where death was merely another stage of service to gods who demanded everything. The embalmer closed his eyes, unable to watch, yet unable to look away. That night, as the chants thundered in his ears, Neferhotep understood something terrifying. If he resisted, he would not only doom himself but condemn his family. And so, like the river, he would flow in silence. For now. But deep inside, a seed of rebellion had been planted. Section 6. The temple's doors shut behind him with a groan that echoed through his bones. Neferhotep stumbled into the night air, gasping as though he had been drowning. The streets were mostly empty, save for a few drunks and stray cats picking at scraps. Yet he felt the weight of unseen eyes on him. Every rooftop, every shadow seemed alive with watching. He walked quickly, almost running, until the familiar smell of baked clay and river reeds told him he was near home. Inside, his wife greeted him with worry etched into her face. She reached for him, but he pulled away, trembling. "I saw them," he whispered hoarsely. "The priests. The children. The altar." His words faltered, his throat tightening as if even speaking it aloud might summon the wrath of the gods. His wife's eyes widened. She clasped her hands over her mouth. "Nefa, no. You must not speak of such things. The walls have ears. I cannot keep this inside," he said. His hands shook so violently he spilled the water she pressed into his palms. "What they do, it is worse than death. It is worse than anything I have ever seen in the halls of embalming." His wife gripped his wrists. "Then bury it in silence, as you bury the dead. Think of the children." Her words struck him harder than the high priest's threats. The children. His children. That night he lay awake, staring at the reed-mat ceiling. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the altar again, the bodies, the chanting. The children's faces haunted him most of all. But Neferhotep was no fool. He knew the priest's power stretched deeper than the Nile itself. To defy them openly was suicide. Yet the embalmer's craft had taught him patience. Bodies revealed their secrets slowly. Flesh and bone held truths long after voices were silenced. If the priests thought their rituals would remain hidden, perhaps they underestimated one who worked daily with the dead. So Neferhotep began quietly. When a nobleman's corpse was delivered, he examined not just the organs but the scars, the signs of mutilation. When a young servant's body arrived, barely more than a boy, he noted the broken bones, the unnatural wounds. Each detail was etched into his memory, though he dared not write them down. And when he could, he whispered to others. An old embalmer, half-blind but still sharp. A washerwoman who once served in the temple kitchens. A slave boy who escaped the festivals, trembling and broken. Each account was another stone in the cairn of truth. Slowly, Neferhotep began to understand the scale of it all. The festivals, the mutilations, the sacrifices, it was no scattered madness. It was a system, ancient and deliberate, built on the belief that sexuality itself was divine energy. To withhold it was to starve the gods. To offer it was to bind the Nile, the crops, the kingdom itself. But the cost was flesh, blood, and innocence. And for the first time, Neferhotep thought of rebellion not as madness, but as duty. Still, he knew one thing: rebellion against gods and pharaohs must begin in whispers, not shouts. And he would need proof so strong that even the priests could not bury it in ash. Section 7. Neferhotep's first chance at proof came in the form of a child. One morning, just as the sun's first light spilled across the Nile, a small body was carried into the embalming house. The attendants laid it down gently, whispering that it belonged to a temple servant. Neferhotep dismissed them with a nod, but inside his chest his heart hammered like a war drum. He pulled back the linen that covered the boy. Perhaps 8 years old. Thin, malnourished. His skin bore marks of ritual paint that had half washed away. But it was the injuries that made Neferhotep's breath catch. The boy's hips were bruised, his ribs broken. His hands bore calluses far too old for his age, as if forced into positions unnatural for a child. And worse, there were cuts, deliberate and symmetrical, carved with a precision that no accident could explain. Neferhotep steadied his trembling fingers. This was no mere accident of labor. This was a victim of the rituals he had witnessed. His apprentice, a timid youth named Sudi, hovered nervously by the doorway. "Master, shall I prepare the natron?" Neferhotep looked at him sharply. The boy was loyal, but loyalty could crumble under fear. Could he be trusted? Could anyone? "Yes," he said at last, forcing calm into his voice. "Bring the natron. And close the doors." When they were alone, Neferhotep bent low over the child's body. "Forgive me," he whispered, "but your silence may speak louder than your voice ever could." He memorized every wound, every cut. He pressed charcoal sketches onto scraps of broken pottery when no one was watching, small fragments he could hide beneath his robes. If discovered, they would condemn him, but without them he had nothing. Days later, another body came. This time a noblewoman. She was young, barely 20, her beauty still evident beneath the waxy pallor of death. Yet her body too bore signs, cuts around the thighs, deep bruises, the same ritual scarring. Neferhotep's suspicions hardened into certainty. That night, he met with the old embalmer again. They sat by a guttering lamp in a back alley, their voices no louder than the buzz of insects. "You see now?" the old man rasped. His eyes were cloudy, but they burned with bitter fire. "It is not blasphemy. It is their law. The priests say the flesh is a vessel for the gods' hunger. The pharaoh's seed, the queen's womb, the children's purity, these are not theirs to keep. They belong to the temple." Neferhotep clenched his fists. "And the people? Do they not know?" "They know enough to fear," the old embalmer said, shaking his head. "But fear is a stronger chain than iron. Those who question vanish. Their bodies come to us." The silence stretched between them. Then the old man leaned forward, lowering his voice to a whisper. "There is one place where the truth still lies open. Beneath the temple of the Black Sun. A chamber where they carve the laws into stone. Not prayers, not hymns, laws. Of flesh. Of blood. Of what must be given." Neferhotep's breath caught. Proof. Real proof. But to enter such a place meant certain death. Yet as he walked home under the dim stars, clutching the hidden pottery shards beneath his cloak, Neferhotep knew the path before him had already begun. The Nile carried secrets, yes. But even rivers flood, and when they do, they drown kings as easily as slaves. Final section, the Chamber of Truth. The old embalmer's words gnawed at Neferhotep for weeks, until sleep became a stranger. He could not forget the boy's broken body, the noblewoman's scars, the altar drenched in shadow. His hands, once steady in their sacred work, shook each time he held a blade. His wife noticed. His children noticed. Even his apprentice, Sudi, asked in hushed tones if the master was ill. But it was not sickness that plagued him. It was knowledge. Knowledge that would not die. So one moonless night, when the temple bells had long since quieted and the priest's chants faded into the dark, Neferhotep slipped from his home with only a lamp and the fragments of pottery he had hidden. Each shard bore marks, sketches of wounds, diagrams of mutilations, desperate proof etched in trembling charcoal. Proof enough to damn him if found, but proof that could not be erased by words alone. The temple of the Black Sun loomed before him, black stone rising like a mountain against the stars. Its pylons were covered in carvings of gods devouring mortals, of kings spilling seed into the Nile while priests stood watch. Even the walls whispered what the people dared not say. The guards at the gate slept heavy with wine. Neferhotep moved like a shadow, slipping between pillars until he found the stair the old embalmer had spoken of. A stair carved not for ceremony, but for secrecy, narrow, spiraling downward into the earth's belly. The air grew damp, heavy with incense and old blood. His lamp flickered. And then, the chamber opened before him. It was vast, its walls etched with hieroglyphs so explicit they would have shamed even the boldest festival songs. There were diagrams of bodies bound in ritual poses, lists of commands etched in stone. Cut to cleanse. Burned to purify. Spilled to renew. At the center of the chamber stood a massive stone stele, its surface gleaming with fresh carvings. Neferhotep stepped closer, his lamp casting the words into stark relief. The womb belongs to the gods. The seed belongs to the throne. The child belongs to the temple. To withhold is treason. To resist is death. His breath caught. Here it was. The law of flesh, carved in stone, undeniable. Not whispers. Not rumors. The truth itself. But as he traced the words with his fingers, a sound behind him made him freeze. You should not be here. The high priest's voice. Smooth as oil, deadly as a serpent. Neferhotep turned slowly. The priest stood in the doorway, torches flaring at his back. Guards flanked him, their spears gleaming. I knew curiosity would drag you here, the priest said. Embalmers always believe the dead cannot speak. But you have listened too closely. Neferhotep's hand tightened around his lamp. He thought of his wife, his children, Suti's frightened eyes. He thought of the bodies on his slab, silent yet screaming. I have seen enough, he said, his voice shaking but resolute. Enough to know this kingdom is built on blood and lies. The priest's smile was thin, cruel. And who will believe you, embalmer? The people fear the gods. The gods obey Pharaoh. And Pharaoh obeys us. Neferhotep looked back at the stele. The words burned in his mind, carved deeper than any chisel could cut. Even if he died tonight, he knew he carried them within him. And words, once spoken, could never be unspoken. He lifted his lamp high. Then let the gods see what I have seen. And with a cry, he hurled it against the stele. The flame caught in the oil-soaked carvings, racing across the chamber. The guards rushed forward, but fire spread faster, devouring the walls, licking at the laws written in stone. The chamber roared with heat, the gods themselves seemed to howl. The last thing Neferhotep saw before the flames swallowed him was the priest's mask of fury, twisted by light and smoke. The temple burned that night. Official scrolls claimed it was an accident, an overturned lamp, a careless servant. But whispers spread faster than ash. Whispers of an embalmer who had seen too much. Whispers of laws carved in stone that priests tried to erase. The temple was rebuilt, the rituals continued, but the fire left cracks. Cracks that grew with time, until centuries later, when conquerors came and the old ways crumbled under foreign gods. But the truth never died. It lived in whispers, in forbidden scrolls hidden in tombs, in the scars on bodies buried in silence. And it lives still, in the questions archaeologists dare not ask, in the artifacts museums hide, in the shadows of history we are told to forget. Neferhotep's name was erased from records, his family scattered, his memory condemned. Yet in his final act, he did what embalmers are sworn to do. He preserved the truth. Not in flesh, but in fire. And though the Nile still carries its secrets, every flood brings whispers to the shore. Some truths, once unearthed, cannot be buried again.